Okay, getting started with the electric bass part 1.
Okay, so if we look at the bass, there's, as I said in the introduction, it's one of many parts. So we've got a body, we've got a neck, we've got a headstock up here, and we're going to be talking about these individual parts. But for this lesson, I just want to talk about the body. And this main chunk of wood here is what we call the body. It comes in many different shapes and sizes, and none of them really affect the tone of the instrument that much. It's really an aesthetic. It's an aesthetic thing, but also a comfort thing. You'll see we've got a small cutaway here, and that's so it sits on your knee, and one up here as well, so it comes into the ribs here. We've got two cutaways here, and that's simply so you can get your hand up here, further up the neck, so when you're playing something up here, okay, you can get your hand up there without it hitting the body, okay? So another thing to bear in mind about the body is that it can be made out of a lot of different materials. Generally, they're all wood. There is outliers out there that do graphite bases, or I've heard of bases that are resin impacted as well. But for the most part, it's just going to be wood. But there are different woods that people use. People use alder very regularly, ash. So, for instance, some of the older basses, like the Fenders, are ash and alder bodies. And really, if you look through time, people have really stuck to those as well, or variations of them. So you can get swamp ash bodies. And as you go down your journey as a bass player, you'll find that you can hear differences in terms of what body wood has been used for the instrument. But because you're just starting out, you won't really be able to hear that yet. But if you hear people talking about, oh, this body wood this body wood sounds different to another body wood, and that sounds different to another body, don't worry about it, because your ears probably aren't developed enough yet to hear that. But that's just worth bearing in mind that when you are looking to buy a new bass, you might want to look at different body woods and take that into consideration with what you're doing. Okay, so that's the body. It's a pretty simple thing. And on the back, I'll just take the strap off here so you can see what's going on the back of the body here as well. On the back of the instrument, you'll see that there's a cutaway here. This is simply so it just tucks into the ribs. And then sometimes we've got a plate on the back here, a back plate, and this is your access to the controls, which we'll be talking about further on in this course. But for the most part, you don't really need to go in there. It's just if you need to do any extra soldering, and you don't really need to worry about that at all. So that is the body. Another thing that I wanted to mention as well is that this is a bolt-on neck, and what this means is the neck here, which we'll talk about in a minute, is actually bolted onto the body using these 4 bolts here. This isn't always the case. You can get neck-through instruments. You can get glued-in necks as well, where they're actually just glued together. A neck-through is where the neck is actually part of the body, whereas this one, it's bolted on, and then you get glued ones, which is kind of like a hybrid of the two. And yes, they do make little differences to the sound as well of the instrument, but again, you're not going to really need to worry about that for a few years, because you really won't be tuned in to, your ears won't be tuned in yet enough to hear that. I can remember when I first started playing bass, and all these guys that I was listening to were talking about all these little differences between woods and bolt-ons and neck-throughs, and I couldn't hear any of that. Now I can now, because I've been playing for years, but what I want you to understand is don't beat yourself up if you can't hear the difference yet, because it will happen. You just got to give yourself time. So that is the body. Now let's talk about the neck.